Hello, welcome back to This Only Kids Football podcast. Today's guest is a man who's about to make half the parents listening wish they'd had someone like him around when they were kids and they could actually move properly. Dr Ben Pullen is a youth athlete development specialist and founder of Young Athlete Training. He helps children aged 9 and above fulfill their potential, reduce their risk of injury and develop confidence in sport. While the rest of us are shouting, pass it from the sidelines, Ben is helping young athletes get faster, stronger and move better. If you've ever wondered whether kids should be lifting weights, whether speed can actually be trained, or if your child runs like they're carrying 2 suitcases full of bricks, this episode is for you. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Ben. Looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. When I started following your page, I'm really interested in this subject because a lot of what we concentrate on is sort of the technical and tactical stuff. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions and a lack of understanding out there about what physical training is for children and how useful it can be. Just speaking from experience, my son, I got him into, he trains with someone on a Thursday and they do like all SAQs, running technique and all that kind of stuff. And it's been massively helpful to him. It doesn't involve a ball. He uses the ball the rest of the week, but this stuff really helped him become a better footballer with the ball because then he learned how to move better. So like, I'm massively into this and really excited to talk to you about these topics. What would you say to parents and coaches out there that, you know, how would you advocate for physical training alongside technical training at this age when a lot of people would probably just say stick to using a ball?
For sure. I think the first thing is just to quickly address the big elephant in the room around strength training, stunting growth. That has been a big myth. It's been around for a long time. It was even taught to me at school, those sort of things. But there's that we can look at the research and that sort of stuff and understand where that myth stemmed from. But just to give some clarity to parents, strength training doesn't stunt children's growth, but inappropriate training could lead to injury. Just like an adult, if I went into the garage and put 300 kilos on a barbell and tried to squat it, I'd be carried out on a stretcher. And it's just that thought process is, yes, it's absolutely safe when it's done safely and appropriately. And recognizing, let's focus on good movement, building up the foundations and making it enjoyable as well. Just because it's safe doesn't mean it needs to be boring. But just to address that front on, it's very much safe and effective. And we shouldn't fear it. But it's then recognizing that strength and movement development is such a huge part of a child's developmental journey. Just like their literacy, their numeracy, their sports skills, being strong and moving well is part of their development, but it's kind of being left by the wayside at the moment for a lot of children where there's a lot of focus on the technical, tactical side of sport. So that's my opening and sweeping statement and kind of it is safe, and we'll obviously delve into this a bit more, but it's such a huge part of their development to help reduce risk of injury, to provide them the movement skills for their future. And a positive byproduct is it's always going to build their confidence and help them with their sport if they're running faster, changing direction quicker and getting less injury sort of thing.
Why do you think that is? Like, what is it that you think has created this resistance to that training, that skepticism around that training? Because even I would have, and I'm really into this stuff, I had this kind of feeling like, oh, you know, is it really worth doing that at this age? You know, are they too young? Wouldn't it be better if I just had him with a ball the whole time? And I got over that skepticism. And honestly, I can say it's also the training that he absolutely loves the most. So why is it, do you think people have that feeling towards it?
I guess, first of all, we have that first myth of, it might stunt growth. And then there's some other lingering myths around that, and it's no one's fault. It's very common for many parents to think this, but I've heard it many times. Oh, well, I didn't think they could actually improve until after their growth spurt. Or sometimes you hear coaches say, oh, don't worry, their speed will catch up when they've had their growth spurt, those sort of things. So those sort of lingering thoughts kind of just create a bit of a narrative to it maybe not being effective, to it not being needed. And I think to flip it, what I think is important for parents to know is actually just some really strong statements of what actually can be done before the growth spurt and during the growth spurt and post-growth spurt. So you can significantly reduce the risk of children getting injured in their sport prior to the growth spurt, which is every goal of every parent, right? we don't want our child sidelined. And it doesn't happen so much when they're younger, but when they go through the growth spurt, some parents might be experiencing this now, but growth-related overuse injuries sort of start to spike. And the teenage years, the growth spurt, is a time where we see the most amount of injuries in children's sport. So we can reduce risk of injury. That is one we can significantly do for a child, a pre-adolescent, a post-adolescent. We can significantly improve their performance. So they can jump higher, jump further, run faster, change direction quicker. And we can improve their movement skills. And this is a bit that's really important because they're actually a really good window of opportunity. And when I say window of opportunity, I don't mean this is the only period in their life you train it and then that window's gone. It's trainable throughout life. But when children are young, one, we've got lots of time before the professional sport is even a conversation. We've got time, and we've got a period where they're very adaptable. Their brain is like a sponge. It's the way it's structured before the growth spurt means they can learn lots of new movement skills, and that's why we want to get lots of variability. But I think the reason I've said those sort of statements is because a lot of parents might have resistance. They might think it's not effective. But how effective would something be that reduces your child's likelihood of missing games because of injury, means they're going to get faster, stronger, move better, and also gives them all the skills to train effectively that if they decide they don't want to play football when they're 14, 15, that they can go into a gym environment and start to train more safely because they know what a squat looks like. They know what a training session looks like. So they're not doing what maybe I did when I was 14, 15 and went to the gym and gathered around the bench press with three of my mates and just tried to do one rep maxes. So there's a few facets. It's not just one thing that makes strength training good. It's when we're looking at that sort of holistic approach and sort of what it can do for a young child, essentially.
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, my son, my dad came around on Sunday and we were doing some training in the garden. And my dad was like, he moves differently now, he flows differently. And that's what I'd say to any parent is that it just because you're working something that isn't football doesn't mean that it won't help football or whatever sport that it is. It actually will help them because it enables them to move sharper. It enables them to accelerate better. It enables them to hold off people because they're stronger. Like, yeah, it's been fantastic for me, and I've really kind of pleased that I took that jump of it. We're talking about strength training for children. What does that look like? We'll start with, like, say I've got a 9-year-old, he's going to be 10 in December. So what does good, safe strength training look like for a child of that age?
For sure. And I think this is the bit that most people struggle with because it is quite a difficult thing because you're balancing engagement, you're balancing safety, you're balancing children who've never done this sort of thing before. But before I address that question, I just wanted to pick up on something you just said there with what you said about your son and seeing how, you've noticed how he's moving different, how you've seen it really positively impact his sport and football. And what I would say is for a 9-10-year-old, there's always diminished returns the more you stack something on. So if they're doing 4 sessions a week, the 5th session isn't going to improve them by 20% more. They're doing 20% more work, but it doesn't mean they're going to get 20% better at football by just stacking more and more. If they're doing 8 sessions a week and then you add 2 more on, they're not going to get 20% better at football. They might get some good coaching that might have that effect, but just there's always diminished returns. You get great returns on the first few hours of training in a week, and then those last, you're just stacking more and more, there's very little return. So what you want to try to do is get the most out of the least. You want to try improve a young athlete or a young footballer as much as you can with as little as possible. So if they're doing no strength training, it only takes 1 hour strength training to have a huge upward trend. But then if you started doing 4, 5, 6 sessions, which I wouldn't recommend, but it'd be diminished returns of strength training. If they're doing 4 or 5 sessions a week, that 5th or 6th, which I wouldn't recommend, but that 5th, 6th, 7th isn't really going to have any return. And it's the same with their football. So it's trying to get the most of the least and trying to not go to diminishing returns and trying to make sure they're getting exposures, which so many children just don't have. If they start jumping regularly, if they start building some strength, going through range of motion, manipulating their body weight, and if they haven't been doing that stuff, you get such great returns on that time. But it doesn't mean that they need to start doing 4, 5, 6 sessions a week. It really only needs to be 1 or 2 for a 9-10-year-old because you've got, like I said, time. And then what does safe strength training look like? Well, it's very much guided by the individual, but just to give some really simple guidelines for parents that they can start actioning, mastering body weight's a great place to start. You know, if you've got a 9-year-old, mastering body weight's a great place to start. And it's just, for me, my perspective is trying to make it games based. Children at 9, 10 years old play football because they love playing football. You know, and when they get older, we move a bit more away from free play and it becomes much more structured. The train's much more structured and detailed. But for a 9, 10-year-old, they like going to football, they like scoring goals, they like making tackles. It's very outcome based. And the strength training, if we're going to do strength training, needs to harness that in the same way. To try use games, to try use challenges, to try use problem solve. So some simple examples, if you're trying to improve speed, tag variations or chase games where they're chasing one another and have different distances to cover. For trying to improve agility, stuck in the mud, tag, those sort of things. And then when it comes to strength training, I use like sort of games and challenges to help them get exposures to holding body weight positions in different positions that's going to help build up their musculoskeletal system. So for parents, it's really hard. I couldn't give like a roadmap on this podcast exactly what they could do safely, but mastering body weight and just making it inherently enjoyable is a great place to start.
Yeah, I love what you said there, because like my son does do a lot of football in the week, but I wanted him to get more physical. I didn't think he was massively like his physicality was lacking, so we took him to boxing. He does boxing twice a week. Um, that kind of introduces him or makes him feel comfortable with getting physical with another child, which has been really good. You know, I'm comfortable with taking physical contact. I'm comfortable giving physical contact. But then as part of that boxing session, they're skipping, they're doing squats, planks. It's all body weight stuff. And I loved watching that. And I said to my son, like, this is fantastic. Like, you're learning how to do different exercises. You're using different parts of your body. Like, you've come out here, you're red faced, you're sweating. I would definitely, I know that like parents can become obsessive about just training the sport that they want their kids to do. But I've seen lots of research and read stuff that actually it's really helpful for children to do multiple sports and then specialize later, because those sports just teach them different things and give them like the opportunity to be creative with their movement, be creative with the way they play and stuff. So yeah, I love that, and I totally agree. Obviously, when you get asked these questions on podcasts, you know that everything's bespoke. It's to the individual. You can't. There's not kind of no silver bullet for anyone. But to try those things would be fantastic. So, and this is definitely one I've spoken a lot about on this podcast. Can speed be taught, and how do you train that with a young child? So that was the main reason I got my son into this sort of SAQ training, was because I felt that he was running flat-footed and he was slow, and it's really helped him. I can definitely say he's got faster. So in your experience, how do you train speed, and can someone who's not massively quick, can they improve their speed?
Absolutely. Every child has the ability to be a faster version of themselves if they haven't had any training that's geared towards improving their speed. And there's two fronts, really. One that's really simple, that doesn't require any speed training or any technical. So we'll break speed into two things, like the actual technical side of sprinting and the exposure of sprinting quickly. But just parking that for a moment, one thing you can do, if your child isn't regularly strength training twice a week, once or twice a week, as soon as they start strength training once or twice a week, the probability, based on all the research, is that they will get faster. That we've significantly shown through lots of different research studies, not my own research studies, but I research different areas, but lots of the literature out there has shown that children, speed is trainable. And things like plyometrics and strength training are going to help them get faster, because essentially speed is underpinned by the ability to produce force quickly. Every time their foot hits the ground, they're having to produce a high amount of force very quickly. So what does strength training do? It raises the ceiling that they can produce force. And then that means that they're putting more force into the ground and covering further distances with each stride, and potentially even turning over even quicker depending on the training method. So just strength training, starting strength training regularly with a mix of plyometrics and strength and manipulating forces through range of motion. So lots of different strength exercises through range of motion that's nice and balanced between building up hamstring and hip muscles and like knee extensors, so like quadricep muscles. that's going to make a young athlete faster. For some, it's going to have more effect than others. Of course, it's always case by case. For some, it will take longer to have an effect. And then the other thing is when we actually look, so physical development, and I think that's the number one priority, because remember when I said we want to get the most out of the least? We know we want children to be children. We want them to play. They've got school. They've got football. So if I'm ever going to choose a training method for a young athlete, I'm going to choose the one that improves the most facets of their performance. So strength training is not only going to improve their speed, it's going to improve their ability to change direction rapidly, because agility is exactly the same. You have to change your force really quickly, and it requires lots of force producing to go from one direction to the other really quickly, decelerating and recelerating. It's going to change direction. It's going to make them stronger on the ball. Football being stronger is going to help them be more stronger on the ball. I'm not a football expert, but I'm just trying to put this into terminology. And it's going to significantly reduce their risk of injury as well. Their overuse injury and contact and non-contact injury rates will come down. So with that training method alone, you've already not only improved their speed, but you've improved pretty much all facets of the performance. They'll be able to kick the ball harder and further. It's going to improve all facets of their performance. And then when we're talking about speed specifically, we then have actual speed training. And the reason speed training is effective for improving young athletes, because quite often parents might be like, you hear this narrative, my child's not very fast, it's genetic, they can't get faster. But when you actually look at their week in football, their high-speed running meters, so in a game, they rarely ever hit their top speed, because one, they're usually fatigued because it's like continuous, lots of repeated efforts. And if you're fatigued, you can never hit your natural top speeds. And two, the distances they actually cover is lots of short, sharp change of directions. You probably see football, it's short accelerations, decelerations, short to the ball, changing direction. It's never a straight out 20, 30, 40 meter sprint. There might be one per game that a child's hitting that, and then they're actually fatigued when they do it. Now, the thing with speed training, a lot of it is with improving speed, it's driven by sort of brain adaptations. How quickly the brain can fire the different muscles together, the different coordinate it, and how quickly it can produce force. So in order to improve that, you need exposures that improve that. So you need training methods that allow the brain to start firing quicker. And that requires not sprinting under fatigue, which most of football is. And it requires usually more than just doing quick, short, sharp change directions with 5-10 meter sprints. So that's where the sprint exposure can improve it, by just doing some sprints with less fatigue, good rest, and over longer distances. And I'm not talking 100 meter sprints, I'm talking 20 to 30 meters. So chase games where children are chasing each other, they're set up and they chase, but then they have a good rest, they have a bit of walk back, they might just do something that's simple, some coordination games in between that's really low intensity, and then go again. That's the exposure side of things. And then the last thing is just the technical aspect. So like speed drills that improve their technical ability. So their coordination, how they actually like move their limbs, how they coordinate it. So you've got sort of, just to simplify it for parents, you've got three sort of areas. You've got the strength that is number one priority because it's going to improve all facets of football. You then got the exposure, because this is the next bit. I think the exposure is, most children aren't getting this. From their football, they obviously get very good cardiovascular system because they're getting lots of fitness exposure, lots of running. It's brilliant. But a lot of that running is under fatigue and it's very short, sharp stops. So it actually doesn't really give them the exposure to improve their speed. So that's the exposure. And then the icing on the cake is the technical stuff, which is like the stuff that like the speed coach might implement. But if you're a parent, and let's say you're in the summer holidays now and you want to improve your child's speed, you don't need to know you don't need to be a technical expert in sprint mechanics. You can just start giving them the exposure. Go play some tag games with them, some chase games, and have good rest, 1 or 2 minutes between, even 3 to 4 minutes if you wanted, between runs. Make sure they're over 20, 30, 40 meters, and then repeat them and do a couple of those, and you're giving them an exposure they're most likely not getting from their football, and that will start increasing their speed. If you can then start doing some strength training as well, that's going to really help turn the needle to improving their speed, and that's how you make significant improvements in a child's sprint speed.
Quick break. Before we dive back into the episode, we want to take a moment to help you level up your coaching game with the help of Football DNA, the ultimate coaching platform that's been a game changer for us. What do we love about it? It's super easy to use, saves us loads of time, and best of all, it doesn't just show you how to set up a practice, it teaches you how to coach it properly. And that's the key. The sessions are put together by top level coaches. We're talking first team staff at clubs like Celtic, Crystal Palace, and West Ham. Proper pedigree. You get videos, diagrams, full explanations, downloadable PDFs, and if you need it, a full 36-week training plan tailored to the age group you are coaching. Our lads have loved the sessions. It's made our lives easier, improved our coaching, and taught us loads. Now we genuinely look forward to training and developing our players. Check it out at footballdna.co.uk. That's footballdna.co.uk, or you can download the app. Just search Football DNA. Trust us now and you'll thank us later. What I love about all this is just that anyone can do this. Like, it's just, obviously it's great if you have the information which you've shared, and then you have the dedication, consistency, and discipline to go and do it, then you will get better. And I think a lot of parents or coaches can feel overwhelmed, like it's not possible, I don't know how to do this, but it actually isn't that complicated. Obviously, it gets a lot more complicated as they get older, growth spurts, maturity, puberty, etc. And then the physiological aspects change. But, starting out, all you need is a field and just running around. So that's fantastic. Getting into that, and obviously my eldest is 9, my youngest is soon to be 6, so they're still very young. But how do things change as boys and girls get older and they hit puberty?
I'll sort of approach this from two perspectives: psychological and physiological. And they sort of interact with one another depending on where a child's at in their development. But let's just talk about the psychology first before anything else. Is whilst obviously we know their physiology is changing around the growth spurt, and I'll sort of explain what happens there, they're also going through psychological development in terms of the way they perceive the world, the way they perceive themselves, the way they can think abstractly, those sort of things. And it kind of changes the approach to training. And most parents and coaches will actually be seeing this in their football training anyway. Kind of what I mentioned earlier, where it's very much games-based. I was out for a walk last night, sort of doing the loop around where I live. I sort of try to go for a walk every day, and I happened to go through the park where the local football team were training. And on one side, you had this sort of under 5s or 6, and then you had, I think it must have been like the Colts, like under 18s on the other side. And if you looked at the training, it was so interesting because the under 5s, you've got 2 kids kind of sat on the floor playing with the grass, 1 kid with the ball at his feet, 1 staring at the sky. So there's no real structure. There's no we're going to do quick feet drills through here, here, and here. It's just play. And then on the other side, I only caught the end of the warm up, but the Colts were straight into drills. So you've kind of got this perfect example of a spectrum of unstructured to structured training. And it's very much the same in how we approach strength training, because when children are younger, they have lower self-control reserves. So let's say self-control is like a bottle of water, and that's a limited reserve. And children have a tiny, tiny little bit of water in their bottle where they can concentrate and focus on something that's not inherently enjoyable. So if it's not a game, the focus there is quite hard for them to put much focus in, or much time. Let's say it's 2-3 minutes they have in that reserve to focus on something before they're playing with the grass or staring at the sky. But as children get older, that self-control reserve fills up. So that water bottle gets more full. They've got 5 to 10 minutes of self-control reserves where they can focus on drills before they start to want to slip to games. So it very much, and that just goes through, it can be in football training, it can be in strength training. So just understanding that, let's just say you've got small self-control reserves with a 9-year-old, we need to make things inherently enjoyable to keep that engagement. So games, challenges, tag, chase, problems to solve in strength training, those sort of things are going to keep them engaged in that. Whereas when you get to 16, 17, we've built up those self-control reserves. Children understand, or young adults by then understand how they've got these self-control reserves. They can put 15, 30, 45 minutes, an hour of focus into drills that aren't inherently enjoyable, but they know serves them in their football, and it's part of and parcel for them to play better on a Saturday. So that's like the psychology, just recognizing that children have low self-control reserve, so it needs to be more games-based. You will have outliers. You will have 9-year-olds who can just not train like an adult, but elicit the same focus, where they could just go in and do stuff that wasn't inherently enjoyable and just do it because they know it benefits their sport. But those outliers are few and far between, whereas when you get to 16, 17 years old, most of those individuals then can train and do drills that aren't inherently enjoyable or games-based. So that's just like the continuum, and just the consideration is, where possible, if you can make it inherently enjoyable, make it a challenge. Let's have a race, or can you do this many reps? How many can you do in a certain amount of time? That sort of stuff, like speed hops or something like that. But then with the physiology, so boys and girls prior to the growth spurt, there isn't too much marked differences. They're quite similar in terms of like the way they respond to training, and that side of things. And when we get to the growth spurt, I know you've probably got listeners who've got young female athletes and males, so we'll sort of just talk about both. But when children get to the growth spurt, for boys, there's an exponential increase in things like testosterone and growth hormone, which means the way they respond to training sort of starts to differ. So they become more responsive to strength training and what we call like a morphological stimulus. So to really simplify it, strength training in children is driven by coordination in the brain and changes to the brain and slight changes in muscle architecture. So the cross-sectional area of the muscle increases slightly. But when testosterone and growth hormone kick in, the muscle cross-sectional area, so the size of muscles, increases much more than a child would. And you see that, right? You see the teenagers start to fill out, they put on muscle mass, because that's driven by hormones. But when that's happening, that is a critical period for injury, because suddenly a teenage boy's got much taller, so the muscles and tendons are stretched, so there's a bit more stress going through them, and suddenly they're much more powerful. So their musculoskeletal system, or their body, is having to tolerate forces that are much higher than they've ever been used to before. You know, month to month, week to week, they're getting stronger and stronger because they've suddenly got all this testosterone and growth hormone, and that's like the perfect storm for injury. That's why around from 9, 10, 11 years, 12 years old, we start to see overuse injuries creeping in, like something called Sever's disease in the foot. And then when it's like 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, Osgood-Schlatters in the knee. And then as they get older, in the spine. But not to go super technical or scientific for parents, it's just knowing that the way they respond to training changes. Early on, it's about coordination, getting them to move better, understand their body, and they will start to get stronger and faster because the brain's coordinating better, with some changes in their tendons and muscles. And then as they become teenagers, as the growth spurt kicks in, more changes are driven by the muscles getting bigger and the tendons getting thicker as well, on top of the change to the brain. With girls, the growth spurt there's still pronounced growth spurt, but it's not as prominent as the boys in terms of the amount of centimeters they might grow in a year during the peak growth spurt. And for girls, it's slightly different. So you have things like estrogen, those sort of things going on. And where boys have big increases in muscle mass, girls might have comparatively more increases in fat mass, just naturally through development, compared to boys. And that can sort of increase their risk of injury if, you know, as they put on weight, they might not if they haven't got good control of their body, they can increase things in like knee injuries, increase a lot when they go through the growth spurt. So there's a lot going on between boys and girls, but the main thing is you can physically prepare them for the growth spurt. If you spend time doing some strength training, teach them how to move, how to jump and land effectively, how to control their bodies, that significantly reduces the risk of injury when they go into the growth spurt, because they can move their body better and their muscles and tendons are more resilient to the stress that I just talked about.
It's really, really interesting. What was that one you mentioned about the knee, the overuse of the knee? What was that injury?
There's a few. It could be Osgood-Schlatter is one, but they might be just grouped as like patellofemoral pain. I'm not a physiotherapist, so I'm not like diagnosing, but when you work in strength conditioning, you become very aware of these injuries. Mm-hmm. But they're basically all similar mechanisms. So the one in the ankle, which was Sever's disease, Osgood-Schlatter, which is one. Depending on where it is in the knee, there's other sort of variations of growth-related overuse injuries, and then it can be in the hip. But they're all the same mechanism, whereby they're basically like what we call like traction force injuries, where the tendon pulls on where the tendon inserts to the bone. Repetitive stress and pulling of that tendon on the bone creates a lot of inflammation, and sometimes it can really sort of, if it's really prominent, it can almost pull the bone off a little bit, not like snap, that'd be what we call an avulsion fracture, but it can cause a lot of inflammation in sort of where that tendon insertion is, in something called the apophyseal. And the apophyseal is sort of the growth plate. And what it is simply where a child, like in football and sports like basketball, these things can be quite common. But in football, there's so many rapid changes of direction. You see this in your 9-year-old. There's so many sprinting and stopping really quickly. And the forces that then go through the knee when they're stopping rapidly, that every time they do that, the tendon is pulling on the bone. And that happens for anyone playing sport. But what happens when that's happening, but they're also getting really tall and getting much stronger all of a sudden because they're growing, means that they're at an increased risk of injury of those overuse injuries. And so many parents are completely unaware of what these types of overuse injuries are, like these growth-related overuse injuries, until they're experiencing it. It's a really tough one. No one's ever, like most parents have never heard of Sever's disease, never heard of Osgood, and then suddenly you get to teenage years and you start hearing of them because 2 or 3, 4 or 5 of the boys on the team have all got it. And for some, it's aggravating, it's irritating while they're playing. For others, it could be a couple of weeks out of sport. For others, it can really derail a whole season in the extreme cases. But there's some research showing like 20% of boys will have Osgood-Schlatter. Some research showing that percentage is even higher to a degree. I actually had it when I was 13. I played rugby, and because I didn't have great guidance then, it actually meant that I ended up having about 6 months out from sport and detrained and got weaker. But to not scare parents here, not to like put the fear into them, but it's a unique mechanism to usually like children that are growing, because the bones are getting longer, the tendons are getting stretched, the forces they're experiencing and being exposed to have increased exponentially, and then they're doing lots of repetitive actions, which is why multi-sport is such a beneficial thing, especially prior to the growth spurt. You'll probably hear like a lot of research or things you read online will say children should try to be multi-sport until at least they've gone through the growth spurt, because it gives them variation in the forces they're exposed to. If a child's playing football 7 days a week, those movements that can exacerbate the knee are much more common, where if they're doing different sports, like they're playing football 3 days a week, but then they're swimming, then they're playing a different sport in the summer, the repetitive forces that are causing those traction-based injuries where the tendons pulling on the bone get dissipated because it's less frequent and more variety. And just to give parents a little bit more understanding on that, I know this gets a bit boring, a bit technical, so I'll just finish off. But there's some really interesting research that shows one of the highest force actions for the amount of force and over time that goes into the knee is a rapid change of direction for a child. They looked at doing squats, they looked at doing plyometrics, they looked at they did it in adults because they didn't want to expose children to do it, but they looked at the forces, and it's a rapid change of direction. So when your child is like running full speed and then suddenly they have to decelerate to change because the ball's going a different direction, that is one of the highest forces they'll be exposed to. Much more than their strength training, much more than the things that they're doing like to improve strength. So now you can kind of see why strength training doesn't stunt growth, because they're actually doing things so much more high force than anything they're exposed to in their strength training.
As part of that, I was just thinking, because it's changed a lot from when I was young, is the surfaces they play on. So most of the time, my son, I mean, when I say most of the time, I mean all the time, he is playing on 3G. He's not really playing on grass. I think they're going to play a little bit more on grass, because as they get older, they play on different pitches and stuff. But I don't know if there's research to reference, or if you have any idea of that. But does the surface matter that the children are playing sport on?
I haven't read any research on it. That doesn't mean there isn't any. It just means I haven't spent time to look into this recently. But I would more than likely say, just off, intuition, and there's probably, lots of other people could go, yeah, there's research showing this. But the things with the hard ground is the forces are not dissipated as much. So when you're on a hard surface, let's say you're on a hard surface versus on a trampoline, the forces would take longer, whereas on a hard surface, it's much more abrupt. And then the other thing you probably see in 3G is there's much more grip. So, the decelerations are much more abrupt because of the grip they have when they're contacting the surface. So the surface is less forgiving, to put it simply, and then it's actually helping them decelerate quicker, which is only going to, theoretically, I haven't looked at the research, but I would almost bet that it most likely does mean that those forces that they'll experience when they change the direction will be more pronounced and increase that risk of injury.
All the boys do stuff during the week in our team, but we have one team session. They are actually training together in other sessions with other people and doing other things. But let's just say there's one team training session with me, which is every Saturday. Do you think coaches could introduce stuff that you're talking about into those sessions, or is it something that they should advise their players or the children to do outside of that training session?
One of the best places to start addressing this is the warm-up. Like, you can take stuff from strength training sessions and just incorporate it to warm-ups, and the research has shown that will significantly reduce their risk of injury in sport and improve their performance. So, starting a session with a bit of mobility work just to get them warmed up, and then doing some like jumping and landing, some hop variations, some jumps, moving sideways, like just giving them a nice curriculum of learning how to jump and land from one leg, going from one leg to the other leg, jumping on two legs, jumping sideways, jumping diagonally. Having that, it only needs to be 5 minutes to get a good plyometric exposure. Lots of hop variations. And then towards the end of the warm-up, doing some like body weight moves. That is enough to create meaningful change. So, if your child they're training football 3 times a week, if they did a 10 to 15 minute integrated warm-up where mobility, plyometrics, some movement stuff, and then finishing with some chase games to get the speed and agility in, that will move things in the right direction or significantly reduce their risk of injury and there's loads of research to show this. So lots of stuff, just an integrated warm-up is enough to start approaching this. So you've got, if you're doing football 3 times a week and they're doing 15 minutes, that cumulative is 45 minutes in a week. That is then a really good exposure that's actually going to help them get faster, stronger, and reduce risk of injury as well.
Yeah, I've been introducing tag games a little bit into warm-ups for both under 7s and they're going into under 10s, under 11s now. And I actually find that really fun, which is also slightly disheartening when you put together a really great session and then the bit they love the most was to actually just running around and playing tag and not the technical stuff, but they really love it. So we've been introducing more of that stuff into our warm-up, and it actually gets their energy levels up. It puts a smile on their face and, gets them ready to play. So I could definitely recommend that from experience myself. What do you think? I mean, you sort of touched upon it, but what do you think? What's the easiest thing that a parent or coach could do this week if they can't go to gym? What's the easiest thing right now, today, if they listen to this podcast today, the kid gets home from school? What's the easiest thing they can do to get started with this?
The easiest thing, without me having to say anything, and I'm not just trying to spread my social media here, but if you go onto my social medias, I put so many free training sessions up there. I've put example sessions for football. I've put general example sessions. So if you're a parent right now and you want to start doing something once a week, just go to young athlete training. This is the easiest thing you can do because I've shared, just go through and it'll say like example session, free training session. And I've even got some free guides, like PDF guides that you can download, and it'll just give you something you can start doing this summer, right now, start today sort of thing. But to give a bit more of a constructive answer, it doesn't need to be much. Training once a week, if your child's doing nothing, like I said, the gains that children get from the most out of the least, if they're not doing anything and you start doing one session a week, they'll start getting, they're so malleable. They're like sponges. They'll get such a good return on investment on that 1 hour a week, or it could be 30 minutes a week when they start. That's all that's needed to make meaningful change. Going from nothing to 30 minutes. And a few things you want is, I'll put this in really simple ways, do a bit of mobility work, some games and challenges that challenge mobility. I've got loads of examples on social media. Some plyometrics, it could be really simple. Challenge them of how many skips they can do with skip and rope in 60 seconds. Repeat that 3 times. That's a plyometric exposure. Super simple. Jumps, you could do long jump. Right, I'm going to give you 10 jumps to see how far you can jump, and we'll measure it up, see how far you can get. Then do some strength training. It could be, I want to see if you can do 6 squats balancing a cone on your head without dropping it, and do that 3 times. And then finishing with, in a press up position, throwing a tennis ball from one hand to the other. What I've just described is a full integrated session where you've done mobility, you've done plyometrics, you've done some power work, you've then done lower body strength and upper body strength. And it was all games and challenges. And that's a really simple thing. It takes about half hour to do. If your child's not doing it and you start doing it, you'll see a difference. And if you can be consistent with it, once a week's great, twice a week's fantastic. It doesn't need to be more than twice. That's going to be more than enough. If they're 8-year-old, you've got the next 10 years to train them as a youth athlete. So, and that's going to prep them for when they're 13 and 14 and they can get a gym membership. The local leisure centre gym allows 14-year-olds to go into the gym, and they're prepped. They've got stronger, they're moving better, and they can start, children can do weights at 9, 10 years old. That's still safe. But, if you're a parent at home and you just want to do something super simple, mastery of body weight's a great place to start. And introducing weights is completely safe. But the one thing I would say is introducing weights is something you want a coach to do, right? It still needs to be safe. It's like a swimming pool. You wouldn't let a child go swimming without a lifeguard. Just imagine your strength coach as that lifeguard when they're doing weight training, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely say, like, going over to your page, like, what I like is the explanations. For someone like me, I just want to be shown what to do. I want to understand the why. Because I actually think that's another misconception, is that people talk about coaches for football in terms of technical, and then people just think, oh, you can, go to the gym or just go and do this and go and do that. But actually, like, when you get into the details of it and lifting properly, you walk into any gym, you're going to see loads of adults doing exercises wrong, working the wrong muscle, think they're working this muscle, but they're actually not, because they're not in the right position. It's even more pertinent for a child who's kind of getting started with it. So yeah, I totally would recommend anyone doing that and looking over at your page and getting those explanations, because it's really good to understand the why as a parent and a coach, not just the kind of doing part.
One thing to add to that as well, another big misconception is thinking that a gym membership leads to improvements. I see it with a lot of 14-year-olds. They've never trained before. They can go to the gym, and parents, and this isn't to criticize parents, it's completely understandable. I did the same at that age. But just thinking, oh, they've got a gym membership, that's sorted now. That doesn't get them the results. It's what they do in the gym. And how is a 14-year-old meant to know the correct training methods that are going to help them improve with their football? So it's just that bit of misconception as well. It's a lot of parents, even parents who've got younger children, like 10, 11, they're like, oh, I built a home gym. And I was like, but what did they do in the home gym? And they're like, well, they come in, we've got some blaze pods, they do that for a little bit. Then we try to do pull-ups for 5 minutes, and then we call it a day, because they just don't know what to do. And that's kind of like, in football, I think it's slightly different because free play is such a great part of skill development. But, in football, just giving a football and expecting them to be able to correct all the things that they're not aware of, that they're not doing right, isn't necessarily going to lead to the improvements that they're looking for.
Quick one for the coaches and volunteers listening. If you're sorting kits for a grassroots team, you'll know the pain. It's never as simple as it should be. That's exactly why Discount Football Kits exists. They supply quality football kits at prices that actually work for grassroots clubs. No nonsense, no hard sell, just reliable team wear that turns up on time and looks the part on match day. From full team kits to training wear for growing squads, everything's built to make your life easier. If you're tired of overpaying or overthinking kits, head to discountfootballkits.com and get your team sorted today. Go Cardless makes collecting payments simple with automatic direct debit. Membership fees come in on time every month without watching parents dig through their pockets only to find a crisp packet or race into the cash point while you wait in the rain. There's no more, I'll give it to you next week. You can just drop a link into your WhatsApp group and bingo. payments are sorted. It handles the admin too, automatically keeping track of who's paid, what's outstanding, and retrying any payments that didn't go through, helping your club keep a steady cash flow for pitch hire, kits, and equipment. You can even pause or adjust payments when families need flexibility, keeping your club supportive and inclusive. Go Cardless takes care of the money so you can focus on running great sessions and growing your club.
With the young athletes that you've worked with, how much can this work transform a way a young athlete feels about themselves, about where they perform, the confidence that it gives them, and that raise in level of how they perform when they get into a match situation?
For sure. Yeah, so I work with a range of children. I work with footballers. I work with all sorts of sports, sort of in a range of different countries and cultures as well. And what I would say is most of the young athletes I work with aren't, what you might think is aren't for the reasons that you might think of, like trying to get them to be professional athletes. So it's not, most of the children I work with isn't a parent going, we've been told this child could be professional, we need to take it up a level. We do have some children doing some exceptional things, like winning state championships or setting national records, which is awesome. It's always great to be a part of that, but we're just giving them the guiding hand. They were a talented athlete before they started with me. It's not just the work they're doing with me, it's the work they've been doing for the last 10 years and the talent they have. But a majority, I'd say probably 80% of the children I work with are those who are maybe a bit more of a range, but who the parents just want them to be more confident in sport. It may have been they're at 11, 12 years old and the other children seem to get a bit faster than them, get a bit stronger. They're not developing at the same rate. So they might train for that reason. It might be they got dropped from a team, and then so the parent reaches out and wants to do something to help them. So that's the bigger majority of the children I work with. And for like many children, I've got some great examples off the top of my head. Ice hockey child I work with got dropped by a team. Parents start with me, and then start with me, work through the summer, and then another season later, they've gone up 2 levels in the sort of how it works in ice hockey in Canada and that sort of thing. And for some children, they didn't have any confidence. Like a young gymnast I work with was really struggling with their confidence because they couldn't do a lot of the moves that they have to do in gymnastics. Within 12 weeks, we're already seeing I caught up with mum the other day. We're seeing some really big improvements in their confidence because she's now physically able to do the things she wasn't able to do before. So it can have a profound impact on some children's confidence. And usually the ones who really need the sort of like physical boost or the level up, where they might be struggling with their sprint speed. They might be noticing their peers are getting a little bit faster. They might not be getting as much game time from coaches. If we can give them the physical level up, it can be revolutionary for their confidence, because suddenly the coach is picking them and noticing them. Suddenly they're getting picked for the team they got dropped from. They're suddenly scoring more goals. And that's kind of how it has that positive influence on their sporting experience, essentially.
I definitely make this mistake where I'm just always thinking about what they are doing physically. So like, what is the impact of this physically? As in, can they do this action better? Or if my son's playing with the ball more, is he going to get better technically? But actually, it's the psychological stuff as well. Like, and if you think about it as an adult, when you start doing stuff, let's just say you were trying to lose weight, you would then start to feel better about yourself. And when you understand something or why you're doing it, and then you start seeing the results, you kind of make that connection, and it kind of really cements in that why, and that's the motivation that you need. And I imagine that's really great for a lot of kids. And also just putting performance to one side. I spoke about this on the podcast before. My son, both my sons do a lot of stuff all during the week. I have no ambition or aspiration for them or belief that this is the path towards elite professional sport. I can say pretty confidently that they will not be professional athletes, but that's not why I'm doing it. I do it because it builds good habits. I always talk to them about being disciplined and consistent, and like, everyone's motivated on Monday, but are you consistent and disciplined on Thursday and Friday? And are you working? And I just want my kids to grow up into adults that work out and go to the gym and exercise and stuff like that. So there's that side of it, right? And also the way you speak, you're literally teaching them about the body and stuff like that.
Yeah, 100%. It's, there's some crazy metrics out there. It's, in the States, and it's not far off it here in the UK, that like up to 70% of children drop out of their sport by 13. And a lot of that is based on their self-perceptions, their physical self-perception. So when they get to 13, they start to be able to perceive themselves, why there's a big dropout from it starts at 7 years old, but why it really ramps up is as children get older, they can start to perceive where their ability level's at. So if they're not as fast, if they're not as technical, if they're not performing well, they can really start to see that. And if they feel like they're not confident or competent or effective in that environment, they lose the enjoyment, and that's why they drop out. And what we're trying to do with physical training is help them be stronger, help them, if a child does some strength training, or we'll use football as an example, and they start to kick the ball harder, score more goals, complete more passes, catch more players in defense, get past more players in attack, they're going to feel more effective. So they're more likely to stay in the sport because they feel more effective in that environment for longer. Because when a child 7, 8 years, 9 years old, they can't really understand why other children might be better than them. They base how effective they are. They base their belief system on positive feedback from parents and positive feedback from coach. But as they get older, it starts to shift where it's most children, especially 12, 13-year-olds, it's not what the parents say and the coach is playing. They're comparing themselves to their peers and who they're playing with. And when that starts to happen and their psychology changes and they can compare themselves to their peers and they notice they're not as effective, they don't score goals, they don't get picked, they're on the bench, the likelihood is they'll drop out. And that's why we see these big exponential dropout rates as children get older in sport.
Just to wrap it up, Ben, just two last things. Was one, the way you were talking, it sounds like you work with a lot of athletes online. I'm just interested to know how you work with young athletes, is it online and face to face? And then I'm sure people have absolutely loved this conversation. And if they do not follow you already, which I'm pretty sure they do, but if they don't, where can they follow you?
Yeah, sure. So over the years, I've gone slowly. It's not happened overnight where it was right, I'm only working with remote athletes and they're in person. But over sort of the last 3 years, I've increased the amount of children I'm working with remotely and sort of decreased the amount of in-person coaching. I still coach some of the young athletes I've been working with for, 5, 6, 7 years now. Still do a bit of in-person coaching with them, but I'm doing a lot more remote coaching. Just for one thing, it's easier to reach more people, like geography. Even when I had a facility in Bristol in the UK where I'm based, and with traffic or children having football those nights or having whatever sport they were in, it can be quite hard to fit training in around. So when I moved to remote training, the way we then provide it means that children can do training to fit around their busy schedules, to fit it around school, to fit around their sports, to make sure that they're still getting those 2 training sessions they need a week to fit it in with their sport sort of thing. And the other thing was sort of the reason I went to more remote training was before 13, 14 years old, there's very little options for children. They can't go to a gym. So it was kind of, I wanted to bridge that gap to provide something that geographically wasn't a restriction. So remote training means they can train with me wherever they may be. And then time restriction, just fitting in with their schedule. So over time, it sort of moved more remote, and I work with children. So fortunate just through the power of social media. I know social media can be a negative in many instances, but for me, it's one positive is I work with children sort of all over. From the furthest I can think, so we've got a young athlete in Hawaii, and then all the way across down to a few in New Zealand. So it's kind of really stretched across the time zones there, which is really a really fulfilling thing for me, which I'm really, really fortunate to sort of experience. And then for anyone who's listening, never seen my face before, new to this sort of area, Young Athlete Training is where you can find my Instagram, and that's sort of where I just post lots of free training sessions, free guides. So if you're a parent right now and you want to start doing 1 session a week, even if it's just half hour, to really start making a change over the summer, there's going to be some resources there that you can use.
Yes, mate. So Ben, absolutely loved it. Thanks so much for coming on. Really enjoyed the conversation. And like I say, for anyone out there who wants to know more about this stuff, go and follow Ben on social media. So thanks, mate. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me on. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Fantastic. And for anyone listening, don't forget to head over to our website, itsonlykidsfootball.com, where you can sign up for our 3v3 webinar that is later this month on the 26th of July, our newsletter, and you can claim yourself a free £300 kit. So head over to itsonlykidsfootball.com to check all that stuff out. So there you have it. If your child sprints like they're running through custard or changes direction with the sharpness of a sloth, there's good news. It doesn't have to stay that way. With the right coaching, the right training, and a bit of patience, young athletes can become stronger, quicker, more confident movers, and most importantly, enjoy their football even more. So don't stress if a child's not a natural athlete. Development takes time. Every child grows differently, and that's exactly why conversations like this matter. So before you think they're destined to be the last pick in the playground, remember you can help them, and most importantly, it's only kids football.
If you enjoyed the podcast, please take 2 seconds to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss future episodes. And if you want to check out our previous episodes, just click here.